Welcome back, it's me, Lou. I'm here for another action figure unboxing and review. And today we are jumping back to the world of Marvel Legends as we take a look at the Marvel Legends X-Men Age of Apocalypse Magneto. Okay, so this figure's been out for a couple of months now. It's December 19th, 2021. I've actually had this figure in my review pile for a little bit now. It's just now that I'm getting around to him. If you're not familiar with this version of Magneto, way back in 1995, Marvel Comics did an event called the Age of Apocalypse. So it was a look at an alternate reality where I believe Apocalypse, he was the main villain, and he kind of threw the world into like this, apocalyptic dystopian type world, and the X-Men were kind of like on the they were kind of on the fringe of survival. And Magneto and I believe Rogue were like the leaders of the X-Men. And I think Magneto was trying to carry on Professor X's dream of like cohabitation between humans and mutants, where they could live peacefully, but, Apocalypse was kind of in the way. So this version of Magneto represents that time period. And since 1995, the Age of Apocalypse is something that Marvel Comics has revisited time and time again. I want to say the last time Marvel touched upon the Age of Apocalypse might have been 2015, I think. And if they've done stories in that universe, during the last few years, I just forgot about it. But the last memory I have of Marvel doing anything significant with Age of Apocalypse was, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. So yeah, right here we have Age of Apocalypse, Magneto. Comes in the much more decorative Marvel Legends box. As you can see here, the Age of Apocalypse logo is at the top. On the side, we have some beautiful artwork, which I believe is done by artist David Nakayama. I believe that's correct. So we have Apocalypse looming in the background, and we have Magneto in the foreground. On the back, again, beautiful illustration, very brief description of Magneto. Magneto casts off his anti-human sentiments and carries on Xavier's dream of peaceful coexistence, thereby founding the X-Men. Okay, so if I remember the story correctly, it's been years ago. I want to say that Rogue and Magneto are a couple, and they have a baby, and I believe they named the baby after Professor X, and the baby's named Charles. And it's a pretty interesting read. I mean, if you're curious about it, maybe you can hunt it down on like Comixology or find a trade paperback or some sort of omnibus that collects, the original story from 1995. I remember Magneto during the Age of Apocalypse. I think the mainline book that he was appearing in was Astonishing X-Men. And I want to say I think that book featured alternate realities of versions of Magneto, Rogue, Sabretooth, Wildchild, I think maybe Iceman. Okay, but enough about that. Let's take a look at the figures. So the other figures in this wave are Magneto, Rogue, Cyclops, Sabretooth, Shadowcat, which is also Kitty Pryde, Iceman, and Legion. Professor X's son. Now, they've already touched upon the Age of Apocalypse in the past. We got an Age of Apocalypse Deluxe Apocalypse figure, came in a much larger box. We got the Age of Apocalypse Wolverine. He's the one that only came with one hand. We got the Age of Apocalypse Wildchild that you kind of use that in tandem with Sabretooth, because in the comic book, they're kind of like a pair. I think that's all the figures we've gotten so far. I might be wrong on that, though. I take it back. We might have gotten Age of Apocalypse Sunfire also. So for this wave in particular, you gather 6 of the 7 figures in the wave. So you need Rogue, Cyclops, Sabretooth, Kitty Pryde, Iceman, and Legion. And then you could build the Build-A-Figure, which is the Age of Apocalypse Colossus, which is right here. This looks like an amazing figure. So in terms of my luck of finding these figures at retail, I bought this guy at Target. I also purchased Rogue. I'll be doing a video on that. Cyclops seems to be the most common. And I've never seen Shadow Cat in the wild. No, I take it back. I have seen her once in the wild. I've seen Iceman once in the wild. My local mall has a Legion figure, and I've seen Sabretooth once. So to be honest, I'm not too drawn in with this line, just because I lived during the initial Age of Apocalypse period back in the 90s when Toy Biz released their line of Age of Apocalypse figures. And to be honest, like, because of nostalgia, I think I'd get a bigger kick out of hunting down the older figures that I used to have back in the day, as opposed to getting the newer ones, just because I'm more sentimentally attached to the original Toy Biz figures. You know, I still have a handful of them, but I would like to try to at least get most of them mint on card. But I do really want this Colossus figure because I think it looks great. Alright, so enough about that. Let's take a look at Magneto. The figure's framed beautifully in the window. There's some effects here. There's an alternate head with the helmet. And he has some extra hands. Those are fists. And he has the splayed out hands here. Okay, alright, real quick, I'm trying to remember how to open up these Marvel Legends. I don't remember if you open them from the side or from the bottom. I think you open them from the side. Let's do that. That might be easier. Alright, so, first impressions of Magneto while he's still in the tray. Very, very impressive. I love the head sculpt. As you can see here, his facial features are really well done. You know, everything has a nice, hard edge to it. You know, especially under the right lighting, the shadows casted on it are, like, perfect. As you can see right there. He has the longer hair like he has in the comic books. He has the shoulder pads. The extra head looks really nice also. Alright, I'm not going to swap the heads out, but we are going to take a look at this head by itself. Let's get this in focus. If we could. Move this aside. Alright, there we go. Yeah, so this is the Magneto head with the helmet. It looks really nice. The details on her helmet are really well done, especially the sharp trim around the open-faced visor. Some nice sculpting on the hair. I kind of like how the hair, instead of like flowing all crazy, is just kind of draping. And it kind of has these smooth contours, so it just keeps all the hair contained into a single shape, as opposed to getting like different strands kind of blowing around. I really like it just staying at a neutral position. I don't want the hair to be flowing all crazy and wildly like on some action figures. There's a part of me that likes this head a lot. Like, it'd be nice, in my opinion, to get another one of these heads and then just cut off the excess long hair and possibly use this as a standard stock Magneto head on one of the other figures, because I think it looks really well done. And I'm not sure if this is a different head sculpt than the previous Magnetos we've gotten, but this would look longer hair. But yeah, it's a really nice head. Alright, so for Magneto himself, amazing head sculpt. I love that face. It does a really great job of giving Magneto some sense of presence and authority. The cape is very stiff. It's a very stiff cape. it doesn't have a lot of give to it. And it's the one thing I like about it. It's a little bit short. It's not too long. It drapes over his shoulders well. It doesn't do that thing where, you know, it kind of pulls back too far and then it starts hitting his neck. There is no peg that holds it in place. I believe some of the other Magneto figures we've gotten in Marvel Legends, they would have like a peg or some sort of support, and then it'd like plug into the back. Here, there's no peg whatsoever. It just, you know, conforms to his shoulders and just drapes over it. I do have an issue with his hair. So his hair's longer, and with the shoulder piece here that covers his chest, it kind of causes the hair to like flare outward as opposed to just resting, you know, on his chest completely. So for me, it looks kind of weird from a profile. The sculpting on the hair is really well done, as you can see here. You know, it's really well done in the sense of how all the different strands overlap each other. Again, I can really appreciate how his hair kind of just flows into a single mass and his drapes towards the bottom. I would have been annoyed if his hair was kind of like flowing in the wind, or if it was sculpted in, you know, too dynamically. I love this sculpting on the bodysuit because it actually looks like a bodysuit. You get the folds and the creases at the armpits. It's not just like a bare figure and then they just paint over it. It actually looks like, you know, some sort of cloth material placed over his body. And the body type they use, I think, is appropriate for this figure. It's not too buff, like, you know, really bulked out, and it's not too thin. And again, you get some nice folds on the legs. The boots are well sculpted. Same with the gauntlets. Alright, so in terms of articulation, his head rotates. It's kind of hindered by the long hair back here. So that kind of limits the amount of range of motion. In terms of looking down, likewise, the longer hair in the front kind of prevents the head from looking down. And the hair in the back prevents it from looking up. He has an ab crunch here, and he could crunch pretty far forward. Likewise, he could kind of arch back like this. So you can't necessarily get him in a full flight mode just because his hair and how far his back moves. In terms of his arms rotate. They're going to hit the shoulder pad, so it's going to stop about there. They can go out, and then they can swivel over there because of the cut. He has double pinned elbows. He has wrist articulation. Swivel at the waist. He could kick this far forward. Could he do the splits? That's as far as his legs will go outward. He has a cut at both thighs, so he has a swivel. Double jointed knees, as you can see here, and some ankle articulation. And there is a boot cut also, so you can swivel at the boot. So yeah, very decent figure overall. Alright, so if we had to talk numbers here, how would I rate him? That's a tricky question, because in terms of an action figure, I think, you know, when you think Age of Apocalypse Magneto, you know, one thing that comes to mind is Age of Apocalypse Magneto had longer hair. He has longer hair. Age of Apocalypse Magneto had a very specific armor, and that's here too. And I'm not 100% sure how accurate that is, but we'll talk about that in a second. In terms of his articulation, everything's there, but the range of motion's kind of hindered. But that's to be kind of somewhat expected. So, I mean, overall, if I had to rate this figure, there's a part of me that wants to say anywhere between 7.5 to an 8. Just a solid 8, you know. The 7.5, I don't want to make it sound like that seems too low, but I think there's ways it could have improved upon the figure a little bit better. You know, I kind of feel that, you know, there could have been ways to, like, maybe soften the shoulder pads here, pull the cape in so it's not as wide, and figure out a way to get the arms to be able to, like, rotate a bit higher. The head movement is kind of limited, so that kind of bothers me a little. But I'm not sure how they alleviate that problem because of how long the hair is. So, I mean, it's great overall, but it's just, falling short in a few places. But I do think it's a wonderful sculpt. It's a great representation of this alternate reality Magneto. And since we're on the subject of Magneto, let's take a look at some of the other figures. So if you're curious about how he compares to some of the other Magneto figures we've gotten in the past. Alright, there's been a couple of Magnetos. I just have two on hand. I'm missing one of the earlier Hasbro Marvel Legends Age of Magneto. And I don't have the more recent House of X Magneto on hand either. That's the all-white one. That came out maybe 2 years ago. But I do have these. I have the black costumed Magneto. I want to say this is the costume he might have wore during, what was it, Utopia? It might have been during the time period when the X-Men were living on Asteroid M, and then Namor was part of the X-Men. I think this is the era from where this costume comes from. And over here, this is the much more traditional Magneto everyone's more, kind of associated with. This is the Magneto that I believe came in the 3-pack with Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver. I think that was an Amazon exclusive. If I'm wrong, just correct me in the comments down below. So yeah, we have 3 different Magnetos here. I believe, do they all share the same body? Alright, so I believe they all share the same upper body. These two, at least to the best of my knowledge, share the same lower waist area. I can't tell if this one's different or not. Yeah, so I believe this one shares the same lower torso as these two also, but I think the belt's just a little bit lower. Maybe I could raise it. Yeah, there you go. Okay. So all of them have different capes. Each cape's very specific to that era. Each one has a different helmet. Again, each helmet's kind of very specific to its era. Like, this design is different than this one. In terms of their boots, I believe these two figures here share the same boots. They also share the same gauntlets. Like I was talking about earlier, for this figure here, there was some sort of support and peg, and it allowed you to plug the cape into the back, which I didn't like at all. This cape just seemed like it was a nuisance. Didn't really want to... For me, anyways, at least with my experience, it seemed like it fought with the figure more than anything. Like, once you plugged it in, it would stay in place, but at the same time, it just felt really bulky on the figure. This one's cape was worse than this one. It didn't want to stay plugged in at all. And then when it did, it kind of like flew out a little on the back. And I think with this figure, they kind of learned the mistakes they had with the capes on these two figures. That's why they opted out with the peg altogether. So I think over over all the different Magnetos, they finally realized, what's probably best for Magneto is just to remove the peg and the support and just have it drape over his shoulders. So I do think in the end, this one probably had the best designed cape in terms of like its conformity to the actual form of the action figure. I think they all share the same legs also. It looks like these two, at the very least, have the same legs. I think the same arms also. But the difference, as I pointed out earlier, was in the gauntlets. They all kind of have the same hands also. So there is a lot of reuse on these figures. Alright, so when it comes to the Age of Apocalypse Magneto, as much as I think this is a great figure, I don't know how accurate it is to like the original first appearance of Magneto in Age of Apocalypse and in Astonishing X-Men. Granted, there's some reuse here, so that could explain why some of this might look different than the version of Magneto I have in my head. And also, Age of Apocalypse, they've revisited that universe multiple times since 1995. And I believe the initial Magneto was originally drawn by artist Joe Madureira in 1995. And since then, different artists have blended their own interpretation of the character. So I'm not sure if this uniform in particular is based off of a very specific design, or if it's this a reimagining of the character. Alright, but what I do have on hand is the original Toy Biz figure from maybe like 1995, 1996. And this is the original Toy Biz Age of Apocalypse action figure, and I love this figure to death. This is like one of my favorite Toy Biz figures. It's very stylized, and I'm not sure if this is more accurate to the original first appearance than this one. For one, this one has the much larger, almost like moon boots, and the gauntlets are very exaggerated. So I want to say, I believe the action figure that Toy Biz produced, this one right here, the initial toy design might have been done by comic book artist Arthur Adams, I think. I could be wrong on that. I just remember like ages ago looking through maybe like Toy Fair magazine or Tomart, and then they were showing some of the concept illustrations of the figures pre-production. And back then, they actually had some real comic book artists provide the turnaround drawings of the characters. And I want to say I saw one of Arthur Adams, or maybe it was Joel Madureira, and they did a turnaround of this character. So they illustrated the front, the side, and the back. And I think that's why this looks as stylized as it does. And I was trying to find, for the life of me, I couldn't find a really good shot of Age of Apocalypse Magneto from the 1995 comics. It seemed like every time someone drew Magneto, they just had his cape covering over all his armor and his body. So this was the closest thing I could find in terms of like a full body shot, if you want to compare the accuracy of the armor. Alright, so for one, this one has the larger pauldrons for the shoulder pads, much like this one. This one has shoulder pads, but it's kind of more that shoulder pads that rest on the top of the shoulder, as opposed to like completely engulfing it, like here. This guy doesn't have the purple briefs on top of his pants. The original design, I remember, did have that, which this one has right here. I remember Magneto's helmet having a much more narrower window in the front of the visor. And that one kind of is represented here. It almost covers up his face entirely. This one still has the long hair. He came with this effect, you know, this giant, like, I believe this was probably reused from another character, and he just like slapped it over his arm or his hand. And then the cape, this easily plugged in. There's two sockets there, two pegs and a tab, and you just plug it in. It is a very clean look. I like this a lot. It didn't get in the way, and it drapes over his body perfectly. So it's kind of weird for me that in 1995, I think they did a better job of engineering and simplifying the cape as opposed to some of these. Like, some of these feel really overdone, but over here it's simple. It doesn't get in the way too much. You know, you can easily remove it, and when it's plugged in, it looks almost seamless. Like there. And it doesn't add a whole lot of weight to the character, so you can stand a little bit easier. So yeah, I love this figure. It looks amazing. So, you know, we have all sorts of Magneto figures here. Alright, so, do you need this figure? I'm going to say if you're a fan of the X-Men line, you know, with the Marvel Legends, I'm going to say yeah. You know, even if this isn't, you know, the standard stock Magneto, I think it's different enough to warrant a purchase. It's a very unique look for the character. But at the same time, the costume evokes some of the more, you know, classic designs. You know, it has the very red costume and the purple highlights. So it's, I don't know, it's a great Magneto. And if you want to, I'm sure maybe you could do some sort of head swap and then just give him the more traditional Magneto head if you wanted a somewhat different costume. Yeah, so it's a nice figure. You know, I don't want to sound like I'm hating it by, you know, giving it a 7.5 to an 8. I just think there's ways they could have simplified it and just made it a little more streamlined and work on the design a little bit more. Alright, so wrapping this video up, once again, my name is Lou. If you are new to my channel, welcome. If you are a returning subscriber or viewer, thank you so much for your continued likes, comments, and support. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. So, until the next video, be safe, take care of yourself, buy lots of toys, and most importantly, be happy. And I'll talk to you later.